Welcome. This is the Beer Guys, Brews and News. Brian, do you know the theme for this week?
I do. It's non-alcoholic beers, Tim.
It is non-alcoholic beers. It's NA is okay, Brian. NA is okay. So we're going to talk about non-alcoholic brews, share some stats, facts, and figures on the non-alcoholic beverage segment, not just beer. There's others out there, Brian. So we're going to talk about those while we sip. We've just got NA beers here. At least I've just got NA beer. Do you have any other non-alcoholic offerings over in your world?
I do have several. I picked up a few. I was out and about earlier today. I'm sipping on a tall boy of Estrella Galicia 0.0. Never had it before.
Okay.
Yeah. It's I like the whole tall boy thing. Actually, I think this is even taller than your typical tall boy. I think this is, what is it, the 19-ounce thing?
19.2. What do they call it? Stovepipe, or is it stovepipe?
I think it's
the 24.
I think it's a stovepipe.
Yeah.
It says 1 pint 0.9 fluid ounces. Okay.
Okay. 16.9. That's
16.9. Yeah. Okay.
That's a lot of beer.
More
than 16 ounces, Brian. It is more than 16 ounces.
In excess of 16 ounces.
Yeah. So, Brian, non-alcoholic beer. And if you follow the show, you know that the way we got to dipping into this is what we call our doctor's orders segment. After a little run-in with the doctor last year, he asked that I limit my alcohol intake. I didn't have to quit, fortunately, but he did ask me to watch it a little bit. So in order to do that, we figured it'd be a good idea, being the beer guys, to maybe find some non-alcoholic beers to check out. So we started exploring that world. And Brian, much like regular beer, the quality of non-alcoholic beer runs the gamut there.
Oh, it does.
So we have found some, I don't know that I've found one that I would say could, quote, fool me as far as a non-alcoholic beer versus a real beer goes. But I've found some that are close. So something that could get pretty close to it.
I have two, I think, that could do it. Bravis had a peanut butter stout that I would have a hard time believing it wasn't some form of beer, even if it wasn't high gravity. And I got to hand it to these guys. I actually sipped on non-alcoholic beers all day because because they're non-alcoholic.
You can work in NA all day, right?
Yeah, and I'm not a huge fan of Heineken, but Heineken 0.0 tastes like Heineken to me.
Yeah, really if you like Heineken, if you're good with Heineken, then a Heineken 0.0 definitely does the job. So it would be one that if you're a Heineken drinker and you don't need or want or can't have alcohol, go ahead and drop one, crack one open. So Brian, go ahead.
I was going to say, it's impressive what they've been able to accomplish with that.
It is. And the quality is much, much better than what used to be available on the shelves. A lot of people are getting into it. We'll definitely dive into that a little bit more later. But being the beer guys, Brian, when we started covering NA beer, lots of questions from people. Who drinks NA beer? Why would you drink NA beer? Yeah, a lot of people don't understand why you would have a beer that was non-alcoholic. It just didn't make sense to them. So, there's still a lot of people out there that want, and I guess maybe need, that booze in their beer. So, but there's also, Brian, shockingly as it may seem, a lot of people that just like the taste of a good beer, and maybe they can't have the alcohol. So,
myself included.
Who drinks, Brian? Who drinks NA beer?
Well, I can tell you that I do, because I did drink them all day while I was working, and it was the good ones were enjoyed and the bad ones weren't, but I enjoyed it. It was nice. I wouldn't do it all the time, but it was fun being able to have something that almost felt naughty while you're working and not suffer any of the consequences from it, other than just the additional 100 calories or so you get in it. But you got athletes, designated drivers, pregnant women, people who are alcoholics that just can't have alcohol anymore, but they miss the flavor of beer. So that's who this is for.
And like you said, you're working all day, Brian, and you can't really sit around and drink beer all day. Just like you couldn't sit around and pop weed gummies all day.
Could not do that. No.
Working, so,
no, you can't do that.
There may be a situation. Maybe you get chosen as the designated driver for your group. Someone's got to drive. If you go out somewhere that has an NA beer, then you can still enjoy a beer, quote unquote, with your friends and do that. So, and something that you mentioned, Brian, NA beer has a lot fewer calories than their boozy counterparts. So if you're, watching your calories, but you still want to get a beer in there, you can do that without. What do you save? I think about 50%, maybe somewhere around there over what a regular beer has.
Yeah, so that runs, it depends on the style of beer, but typically your non-alcoholics run in the neighborhood of, on the low end, like 80 or 90 calories, all the way up to like 150. But craft beer, like most of the good stuff, it starts like 250, but it goes way up. Like, if you were to compare that peanut butter porter we were talking about, or peanut butter stout, the non-alcoholic one, yeah, it might be 150 calories. A regular peanut butter stout is probably going to be closer to 350 calories. So it's
right. 350 delicious boozy calories.
That's right. The delicious, delicious calories. But
Brian, I think you showed what you were drinking. You're drinking the Estrella right now?
Yes.
Okay. Well, I have a Partake Pale. Partake was nice enough to send us a little sampler, one of each of their offerings. We tried the blonde on the regular show, and it was pretty decent. This Pale is pretty good too, Brian. This quenches the thirst there.
Gets you the feeling of having a beer.
Yeah.
That's right. Acceptable.
Yeah, and I think this is Brian, I think you had some definitions there. There's different categories when you're talking NA beer. There's non-alcohol, alcohol-free, and some others there. So how do they break those down?
Yeah, so I think it does depend on who's reporting it, but the best I can figure is alcohol-free is supposed to be less than 0.05% alcohol, and in some places it has to be a true 0%, nothing in it. Most of the stuff I've had today, as it turns out, is the 0% stuff, which is even better, because when you take a step up and you go to your near beer or your de-alcoholized beer or your non-alcoholic beer, that's 0.5% or less. So you have 0.5% in there. And then there's a category of low alcohol that's recognized by some places that's 1.2%, which is more alcohol, yes, but it's so low that you're unlikely to ever get intoxicated or suffer huge impacts of it. But it will. You have a few of those, and you might feel something.
Might feel it. A few, you'd be like 1.5%, the equivalent of 1.5% beer. So
yeah,
I guess it depends on how sensitive you were there to that effect.
And the low alcohol is something a pregnant woman is probably not going to want to have, because any of the alcohol at all is probably a really bad thing. But the non-alcoholic stuff under like 0.05% or even under 0.5%, probably all right to enjoy from time to time. And the stuff that's 0.0, knock yourself out. You're in the clear on that. So
for what it's worth, Brian, I did have a friend tell me when she was pregnant that her doctor told her, a beer a day or a glass of wine a day is totally fine. That, if you want to have a little drink there, that one glass isn't going to hurt. Maybe one bottle of wine, maybe a little too much.
Just a bottle, maybe a bottle a night.
Maybe a little too far. Yeah. How big is this glass you're talking about, doctor? I
have seen the glasses that will fit an entire bottle of wine. I'm not a big wine drinker anymore, but I've seen it. It really runs the gambit what you can get out of it. It's interesting because they all seem to these terms all seem to imply the same thing, but there are differences. The interesting thing is even most of these, like the non-alcoholic or near beer or whatever, a lot of places you still have to be 21 to buy it with like 0.5%, or you can't ship it in some cases,
right?
Just because there are weird laws.
Georgia, in Georgia, it is categorized in with regular alcoholic beer, and that's something Athletic Brewing ran a sponsorship on the Beer Guys radio show, and we do have a lot of our listeners here in Georgia. And they did find out when they went there that they had originally shipped here, and they were told they couldn't do that. There's a handful of states that do still kind of group it in there to where you're not able to do that, even with NA beers.
And that's a shame.
Yeah. But Brian, overall, the segment is booming. The NA beverages segment, not just NA beer, and globally, sales of no and low alcohol beverages grew 31% in 2020. According to data intelligence company ISWR, they also predict the segment will grow 34% by 2024 across 10 markets. Those markets being Australia, Brazil, Canada, France, Germany, Japan, South Africa, Spain, the UK, and the good old US of A. Now, those 10 markets alone make up 75% of the global consumption of no and low alcohol beverages. So pretty big growth in that segment. The U.S. actually lags behind many European countries in sales of NA beverages, where they make up just 1.9% of the overall beer category. So, however, sales in the U.S. of all no and low alcohol drinks grew 30% in 2020, and the NA beer segment specifically grew 34.8%. So definitely seeing growth here. In addition to no and low alcohol beer, there is growth for NA wines, spirits, and RTD cocktails, or the ready to drink cocktails in a can. So now, interestingly enough, Brian, much of the growth is attributed to millennials. And the millennial segment actually accounts for 42% of the NA market.
That's really interesting. They're young. They should be foolish, right? They should be out there enjoying themselves. Apparently not,
man. I guess that they're kind of taking note there, watching out for themselves, drinking some NA beers. And, it's also probably because as they're exploring these things, there are more options there. Just like with craft beer with us, there's a lot more options in craft in general. There's now a lot more options for NA. It's not just O'Doul's or Sharps.
Yeah, that's all it was. And if you ever tried it, if you had a friend that drank it, or if you tried it on a whim just to see what it tasted like, it was very disappointing. Yeah. I mean, it was helpful for the folks that needed it at the time, but thank God there are other options now that are available. So
yeah, and there were people that were diehards of O'Doul's or Sharps or whatever, that couldn't have alcohol, and I guess it was good that they were there and available. So I remember back in my skate punk days, Brian, if you can believe it, Thrasher magazine had a recipe for, I don't remember what they called it, but they called it the recipe. But basically, you took a jar of salsa and poured it over a block of cream cheese and mushed that all together, and that was a dip. And as a young teenage skate punk, I had to try that, and they recommended that it went great with a cold beer. So I actually, as I was getting the stuff together with my dad at the store for this dip, I happened to see it was either O'Doul's or Sharps, one of those. I was like, "Hey, Dad, will you get me some of that to go with this?" So he did. So I got to have a beer and my Thrasher cream cheese salsa dip, and for that moment, I was the coolest kid in the neighborhood.
Well, I mean, how was the dip, dude? I'm sure you remember.
Good. It was good.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, creamy salsa, cream cheese salsa. It was all good. So
yeah, that sounds like that would be good. Yeah. When you were talking about the stats, I know this from looking back at the notes that we took back when we had Bravis Brewing on the show, the non-alcoholic guys. At one point in time, I don't know if it still holds true, but 1/3 of all the world's non-alcoholic beer was consumed in the Middle East. And that's been a huge segment for that, and a huge opportunity as well for these guys. I mean, obviously, there's a lot of room to grow in the U.S., and there's a lot of interest in it amongst millennials. So, yeah, the sky's the limit for this stuff, really.
Yeah, big group out there, definitely available drinking their NA beers. Brian, with NA brews, you got a lot more options of what you can do with those brews, too. So, due to current laws, you cannot put THC in an alcoholic beverage. But there are companies out there that are taking non-alcoholic beers and infusing them with both THC or CBD. As a matter of fact, what is his name? Keith Villa, the creator of Blue Moon, Brian. He actually started a company called Syria that makes both CBD and THC infused beverages. It's growing a lot. I saw Lagunitas has one that's an IPA inspired beverage with THC in it. So, a lot of options out there for that. So when Sweetwater originally was acquired by Afria, I was on the conference call there when they were talking about kind of the plans and such. And they mentioned that, of course, as things become legal in the U.S., they'll explore this market, but they have a presence globally. And they were saying there's definitely a lot of consideration of how they're going to explore global markets with THC and CBD, even going as far as to say the potential there for THC infused nut milks, Brian. So if you want a little THC in your almond milk, you may be able to get that soon enough. It may be out there now. I can add my Autocrat coffee milk syrup to it and then get THC on top of it. See?
I'm going to be in heaven.
There you go, man. THC infused coffee milk. I think that's what the world's been waiting for.
Yes, I think so. I shouldn't have said it on this, and now somebody could
you're giving it
steal
up,
my
man.
idea. Yeah,
you're giving up all the good stuff there. So
this coffee milk is so dank, man.
Dank coffee milk. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff out there. Something that's popular now, I think it's called Delta 8, and it is apparently it's very. I think it's It is a type of THC, but it's different, I believe.
I happened to look into this myself recently, and it's a form. I think it's THC. I can't remember which is the number, like 9 or some component of it. Over time, degrades into this, and that component is illegal. But the 8, I believe, is not officially illegal, and possibly. I mean, it's up to debate as to, but. A lot of places are unaware of it, and you can have similar effects from it, but it is not exactly the same thing. So I think it skates by on a technicality. So,
but it can have many of the same effects, correct?
Indeed, yes, it can. It's okay. It has been said to have similar effects to the other stuff, because I think it is related, but it is not the same thing. So it is definitely not quite the same thing. I think it's still considered CBD, but it's not the CBD that you typically see. So interesting stuff.
And due to a technicality on the legality of it, there are states where regular marijuana, THC containing marijuana, is not legal, where the Delta 8 still is.
Yes, it's correct. That's my understanding. I'm not an expert on these things, but I did have a reason to look into it recently. So I did a little bit find out about it. So I had no idea, but there's always little loopholes about all these things. So you could get that stuff shipped in a lot of places. You probably get it shipped here, but you can't get non-alcoholic beer shipped here, which is a weird thing when you think about it. It's weird. It's a little weird, but
laws are weird. Alcohol and drug laws and all that, they're crazy. You can go to the doctor and get something prescribed fairly easily that's 10 times worse than any marijuana would be, but but it's legal with a doctor's prescription there. So
some interesting opiates are very much legal, or the cleaned up pharmaceutical version of them are. So
I guess advertise them on TV. Imagine that. Imagine if we were in a place to where marijuana was totally legal, and we're like, ask your doctor if purple haze is right for you.
It's right. Yeah. I thought you were going somewhere else. Like, ask your doctor if IPA is good for you. I'm like, no, this is the worst thing that could happen.
No, not that direction. Different direction.
Good.
Brian, you still on your Estrella there? I've got another one here I'm about to dip into.
I am, but I am looking forward to trying out the Brew Dog. It's not the freshest can, but it was what was available when I was making the rounds.
Yeah.
And I was, you know what? I might just crack it up and drink it right from the can.
Brian. Don't be scared.
Let's do it.
And that's, mentioning that Brew Dog one, that's another thing. A lot of mainstream breweries or bigger breweries are getting into the non-alcoholic beer game. Lagunitas has an offering that's non-alcoholic. You've got Brew Dog, Brooklyn Brewing, and alternative, I guess not really NA beers, but there are other hoppy beverages. There's hop teas, there's hop water. Lagunitas does have one they call a hoppy refresher. That's a hop water basically. And we've talked to a couple, Brian, I think you have the dates there. We've talked to a couple NA brewers on Beer Guys Radio before. We've talked to Athletic and Bravas Brewing, and we'll actually have on in a little while. What's the date, Brian, on that Hoplark show?
The Hoplark is coming up on May 12th.
May 12th, Hoplark. That's hop teas and hop water. We're going to talk to them, check that out a little bit. We have sampled those, and we actually know Mike Nate, our producer, had a hop water, and apparently mentioned to Hoplark, and they told him, they're like, no, those aren't even available yet. So we got a little preview on those hop waters there. So
they're really interesting. If a lot of them have a lot of characteristics like tea, but we'll get into more of it when we have them on the show. But if you're interested in hearing about Bravas and that great peanut butter stout, which I believe is limited edition, I haven't seen it recently, but I think he was going to make it a regular deal. Bravis on September 26th of 2020. So that was when that show was. And Athletic we had on February 16th of 2019. So we were
2019, and that's
a little ahead of times. Yeah.
I'm going to get into this. Is actually one of my favorite NA beers, Brian. The good old Athletic Run Wild. So time to get into that.
It's up there. That's a real quality non-alcoholic IPA, and that's if as a spacer beer when I've needed one,
that's right.
Maintaining, I like that for that. I'll mix one in. I'm like, I want to drink some more, but I really don't need another 7-8%. I just kind of want something fizzy to sip on for a while, and I'll just I can have that, mix that in. So I like the Athletic Run Wild for that reason alone.
Fizzy, hoppy, malty, and less than 0.5% alcohol.
And when it's fresh, it's right on there, man. It's good. It's I can still tell it's not quite alcoholic beer, but it's not alcoholic beer, but it's close enough that it's if you're doing something or playing some games or reading a book or doing whatever you're doing, it's fine. It works perfectly for that.
Speaking of the freshness, I think that's something I've noticed with the non-alcoholic beers. And people talk about it a lot with IPAs, keep them cold, drink them fresh. NA beers do not hold well at room temperature, do not hold long. So if you do dip into some non-alcoholic beers, get them in the fridge and drink them, keep cold, drink fresh. And I'm assuming that the alcohol does help, to prolong the regular beers some there, because these NA ones, they'll get to tasting poor quickly.
Well, and if a strong component of their flavor winds up resting on hops, then you've got the same problem you have with an IPA, but you don't have the alcohol to back it up. So you don't have the preservative. Yeah. Well, you have the preservative and you have some of the flavor of the hops, but when that goes, you really don't have there's nothing there behind it, Yeah,
Brian, I'm no science man. So I don't know how it all works. I don't know how all this stuff necessarily plays into each other, but they definitely do lose their pizzazz pretty quickly. Do you recall some of the other ones we tried, Brian? What have been some of your other favorites? We know the Bravas. So here you go. If you're listening right now, these are the NA beers that we can recommend. Athletic, most of their line is good, specifically Run Wild. And Brian, I don't know if you can look it up right now. Was it Free Wave? Was that the one they did that was?
That sounds right. I can
Run
take a look.
Was my favorite until we tried the Free Wave, and that would probably take my top spot from Athletic there.
Was that the Dippa? So, was that their version of a Dippa?
I believe so. Yeah, and the Bravas Peanut Butter Stout, like Brian mentioned, was very good. One that I really liked, but it was a little unusual. Well Bean does one that is electrolyte infused NA beer.
Was that a wit beer? I remember that. Yeah,
I believe so. And it had a little minerality to it that I really dug. I thought was good. I'm not sure that if I would say, hey, this is a beer, but I enjoyed the overall taste of it. So, that'd be one worth checking out there. But we see Athletics always doing one-offs and seasonals and that. And I think you mentioned they've actually got a collab coming up, right, Brian?
I do. And the one you were talking about is Free Wave Hazy IPA, the non-alcoholic version.
There you go.
And yes, they do, in fact, have a collaboration that was released, announced to be released with Earth Day, basically. It's obviously non-alcoholic beer. It's a collaboration with Justin's, which is known for, you said, nut milks. He's known for nut butters. Right? Yeah. So it's called Nature Nut Peanut Butter Porter. And you can buy it directly from athleticbrewing.com, and up to $10,000 of the proceeds will be donated to the Rocky Mountain Conservancy for work on the Rocky Mountain National Park. So, that just came out this week, and I haven't checked if it's on the website yet, but it's supposed to be. Okay. I believe it dropped on Earth Day, I think. So you may want to check that out. Their stuff tends to move quickly, so it may not still be there.
They've had ones they've released and the email goes out and within hours, just like any other sought after beer release. I think Athletic's probably the one that's most sought after of the NA beers. So it's definitely, when they do some limited runs, it moves pretty quickly.
Yeah, they've been so popular with their beers. They open up a large facility on the West Coast. They took over.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think of what the previous brew was. It like a Green Flash location? I think it may have been.
Was it a Green Flash?
I'm not 100% sure.
No one knows, Brian.
Yeah, but it was on the West Coast, and they needed the production capacity because they just couldn't make beer fast enough.
Yeah, they're based out of Connecticut originally, and opened that California location, West Coast location, to keep up with demand. I can see California being a good place for that. West Coast in general, they're more healthy than us Southerners that like everything fried. You know what? They need to figure out how to deep fry an NA beer, and then they'll take off down here.
And then you stuff it into a chicken and you deep fry that.
The turbo duck, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
I just pulled it up while you were talking. Athletic does have that Nature Nut beer. It's available. You get a 6-pack and it comes with some of the nut butter to go with it. So it's charitable. Okay. Goes to help the environment for Earth Day. So I'm guessing it's going to be a tasty beer. A lot of times, sometimes the non-alcoholic beers have challenges with the lighter end of things, but usually they do pretty good with the darker beers. The closer you get to a stout, the easier it is to kind of hide the fact that there's no alcohol in that
yes.
beverage. So I'm guessing that's going to be pretty tasty.
And along those lines, I will say, Brian, the lighter NA beers I've tried pretty consistently are the worst examples. The light lagers that I've had that are NA, it's really hard with whatever the process is there. And Brian, I think you actually have some news on that, don't you? The different types of processes used for making NA beers.
Sure. Yeah. There's when you have a situation like that, you don't have a lot to hide. There's not a lot in the beer to hide because it's so light. So when that stuff is gone, when that alcohol is gone, you're got to be tight with everything else. So there's a couple of different ways of making non-alcoholic beer, and it people really do. All these manufacturers do it a different way, but so you can de-alcoholize the beer, which is basically heating the fermented beverage up just enough for the alcohol to escape, but not really theoretically not cook the beer. I think it can contribute to some interesting flavor in terms of the beer. You can also use pressure, apparently, to force the alcohol out of solution as well, and wind up with non-alcoholic beers in either case that way. There is a reverse osmosis process that extracts the water and the alcohol, and it just adds the water back in after the alcohol is gone. I don't know a lot about that. I think I get what's happening there. I'm not sure how they're able to pull it off. I'm guessing different materials pull off both, and then they just put the water back in, wring it out. Maybe it's a sponge. I don't know.
Amazing. Yeah.
Yeah. So you can just do what some people do and brew a regular strength beer and just dilute it down. But in my mind, it seems like that's got to be the worst option. I mean, just taking a beer and just putting water in it. It's like,
you would think that you would have to brew it unusually strong to dilute it down to the right place, and I just feel like you wouldn't get the taste right. But
I think it'd be really difficult. I think that's like throwing darts blindfolded. I guess you just have to do it over and over again until you figured out exactly what would nail it. And I don't know how successful people have been with that. There is a newer one that's come out in the past couple of years, and I think that this is one that Heineken does, and I'm fairly certain it's something that Bravus does as well, is they have a special type of yeast that produce very low alcohol amounts.
Right.
And so you don't have to do much with it. You just let the yeast do its work. It does the fermentation. It produces all of the stuff that you want, but the alcohol is really never there. Or if it is, it's in very small quantities, and it takes very little to dilute down to what you need. So that's the other way. And I think that a lot of the successful ones in terms of the best flavor have started doing something like that. Just again, the other ones are,
I'm no science boy, but they've got it figured out. I know when we've talked to the NA breweries and we've asked about the process, they're all very guarded with what their particular processes are.
Some won't even tell you what category it falls in.
Yeah.
I mean, I forget, was it somebody, I don't recall who it was. Bravus, I'm pretty sure, said that they said at some point that they used used a special type of yeast to achieve what they were doing, or that was part of the process. I'm not trying to say that's the entire thing they do. I'm sure they do more than that. That guy
I'd love to know what processes they use and sample the beers to see if there's a noticeable difference from one process to the other. Because, like we said, there's a huge difference in the quality of these NA beers, just like regular beers. And we recently had an NA brewery reach out to us wanting to be on the show, and they were nice enough to send us a case of their beer, a sampler. They were undrinkable. I mean, to the point where we had to email them and thank them very much for their generosity, but declined to have them on the show. They just it was not a good product. So
yes, yeah, I don't want to throw them under the bus.
I don't want to speak ill of anyone. They were nice enough to reach out and share their beers. I tell you what, listen to what we say we like and go off of that. You know, where that's it. We'll talk positively about what we do like.
Yeah, I'm not a fan of. As it turns out, there's a lot of flavors I enjoy in beer, but mustard is not one of them. As it turns out,
I don't like ground meat. Not a fan.
No, don't care for that much either. No.
Sewage, pass.
No, not a fan of that either. You know, something that I found, and you might enjoy this. There's a certain minerality to this one that I had earlier today. It's a Suntory all free one. Okay. I think these are the guys that own a distillery. I think I want to say Four Roses, might be Buffalo Trace. I don't know. I'm not that big of a geek on that. This was actually pretty nice. It did taste like your Asian lager that you might have in addition to, some Chinese food, some Thai food, something like that. I could tell it was non-alcoholic, but it was pleasant, a little floral. It would have been perfect with it. It was a minerality to it. It's not quite chalk, but like getting close to that. And you like the minerality. I'm thinking you might have enjoyed that. And this is just something I picked up randomly off the shelf at a Total Wine near me. So I thought this was actually pretty good. I'd drink this.
Okay. Yeah. I have to look out for it then. A couple of actual beers that I really enjoy that have that character to it. Southern Brewing Company here in Athens, Georgia, did some beers that aged in amphoras, the clay aging vessels. And those imparted a minerality that I really dug. I thought was really nice. And Fonta Flora is another one, just the water that they have up there near Asheville, North Carolina. The character of their water across all their beers is just really super nice. So I dig it.
Yeah. I can't disagree, especially with the Fonta Flora. I very much enjoy their beers. They have the beer has a vibe to it. I'm guessing it's just that minerality, but it kind of gives me an overall vibe. But I'm like, I'm cool with this.
The vibe. I'm cool with it. Yeah. Well, Brian, what else you got, man? That's all I got about NA beers.
I think that's, let me see. I think that's most of what I've got. We've gone over the terminology. Oh, something that's Texas Select is America's oldest non-alcoholic brew. Did you know that, Tim? Texas Select.
I did, Brian, and I'm going to repeat this story only because we covered this on the regular show this week or last week. But when I was around 11 or 12, I went in the health food store with a buddy, and they had an NA beer in the cooler there, and we bought it, took it out, and as we're walking down the street, shared the can and passed it back and forth. We got busted by the popo, Brian.
Of course.
And he came out, asked us what we had. We showed him NA beer. And when I saw Texas Select mentioned, I'm like, that's what I had. I had a Texas Select. So, and that was once we showed him what we had, he was fine. He left us alone and let us go on. But he was on our tail hot when he saw two 12-year-old kids walking along, passing a beer back and forth to each other.
How tall was your mohawk at that point in time?
I didn't get that till I was about 15. So that was pre-mohawk days. So yeah, pre-mohawk and post-mohawk, Tim. So
yeah, it's very different characters.
Right.
I happened to I was looking through some of the old stuff that we did, and you'd mentioned that it had Texas in the name, and I did a search on what I thought the name was, and I'm like, oh, it's the oldest non-alcoholic beer in the America. So like,
yeah, and at that time it was sold at a health food store. So, I guess
it's so healthy.
Yeah.
Well, beer does have like some vitamin B in it, some electrolytes and some other stuff. And I'm guessing that even if you pull the alcohol out of it, it still has some redeeming qualities that make it in some ways nourishable. And if nothing else, it's water. It'll rehydrate you.
Hydrate, man. Hydrate. Yeah. Absolutely. Well, Brian, I think that about does it for this episode of Brews and News. Please do tune in. We don't have a regular schedule yet, but we'll get it figured out. What the best time is, and make sure to tune in every week to Beer Guys Radio. New episodes out every Saturday. Brian, new radio stations for BGR.
Yes.
This week. Beer Guys Radio now available on Extra 106.3 in the Atlanta area, actually broadcasting out of Marietta, and also available in Ventura, California now. So
nice. Very
we're stretching out there, getting out there. But everybody, thank you so much for tuning in. Hope you have an awesome weekend, and we will talk to you again soon. Cheers.